all heating systems. Your home, your comfort zone. Save energy or your money back with Tado Smart Thermostats. Conditions apply. Visit tado.com. T-A-D-O. German engineered.
How can UU give someone a hug when you can't be with them? Give them a UU bottle. Go to uubottle.com.
I'm security. Say hello to my little friend.
What's up? Ease here.
Together we're EFAX.
Turn right onto Staines Road, A315.
EFAX is safely, almost like it's
In 300 yards, turn left onto Harlington Road West, A312.
So it's no more machines, no more maintenance, and no more... but more faxing, like this. The ultimate
combo.
EFAX. It's secure, easy. Head to efax.co.uk/corporate.
This is LBC Tonight with Andrew Marr.
Take the next left onto Harlington Road West, A312.
Boris Johnson travelled to Brussels to meet other NATO leaders to discuss the war in Ukraine. My next guest, Lord Peter Ricketts, was the former permanent representative to NATO, as well as a national security advisor. Lord Ricketts, welcome and thanks for joining me. Now,
In half a mile, slide right onto Causeway, A312.
of the United States, but I have to start by asking about something extraordinary he's just said in a press conference. He was asked what the reaction of NATO would be to the use of chemical weapons by Russia, and he said that NATO that would trigger, and I quote, a response in kind. Please reassure me he was misspeaking.
I think I can reassure you, Andrew. I cannot believe he meant that NATO would respond with chemical weapons against the Russians. We don't have chemical weapons in our armories. We gave them up decades ago. I think he meant we would respond in a serious way at the level of the awfulness of a chemical weapons attack. Let's give him the benefit of that doubt.
Let's absolutely do that. At the same press conference, or a little bit before, Boris Johnson was talking about all the aid that Britain and other countries are sending to the Ukrainians, and he said we're going to send another 6,000 new missiles, for instance. Now, in a sense, I wonder whether we are not tiptoeing into fighting a kind of proxy war, not with Western troops, but with Western weapons, and whether at some point there's a real danger of the Russians deciding they have to take out NATO-provided weapons and possibly NATO convoys and so forth, bringing them into Ukraine. Is that a worry?
I think that is a risk, yes. And so far, actually, it's been extremely effective, I think. We've equipped Ukrainian forces with modern Western weapons.
Take the next right onto Causeway, A312.
And they've really dented the Russian advantage, not stalled it completely. But I do agree, I think there's a line beyond which, if we start supplying fighter jets or tanks, I see President Zelensky was calling for that, heavy armored equipment of that kind, at some point or other, there is a risk that Russia will bomb a convoy taking that equipment into NATO, into Ukraine, or possibly even, at the worst, bombing it while still in NATO.
Continue on A312 for 1 mile.
Whereas small, light, man-portable missiles are very, very effective, and perhaps a bit less of a risk of that.
Yes, we're always worried about escalation in these situations. It's very dangerous at the moment. Jens Stoltenberg was talking about the danger of chemical weapons being used, and he said there would be widespread consequences if the Russians used those. For people listening, can you translate widespread consequences?
Well, I think my translation would be they're being deliberately ambiguous. In a way, deterrence depends a bit on ambiguity. You don't tell your adversary exactly what you would do in each circumstance. By the way, I'm not sure they know what they would do. I suppose it would depend a bit on the scale of the use. Remember in Syria in 2013, the British Parliament famously voted down the proposal that the UK should respond to Syrian use of CW. Of course, this is very different. But are we going to go to war with Russia over a chemical weapons use in Ukraine? I personally don't think so. I don't think the West is prepared for all-out war with Russia. So Western leaders are left struggling for words which imply very serious consequences without saying what. By the way, I think that's probably inevitable that they should be doing that, and I'm sure there should be more serious consequences, but I don't think they're yet ready to spell out what they are.
This is clearly a moment of history for NATO and for the West. For a very long time now, it seemed that America was looking west, looking to China, the rising threat of China, things going on in the South China Sea and so forth, and was becoming, in a sense, bored of or distracted from Europe. and that seems to be changing. It's reported, I'm reading a direct quote, President Biden apparently told business leaders in the States, now is a time when things are shifting, there is going to be a new world order, and we have got to lead it, and we have got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it. Is this a pivotal moment when NATO goes back to where it started?
I think it is, I think America has been in retreat from that leadership of a world order since Iraq, and they backed out of helping in Libya. They absolutely no help at all in Syria. None of us did. And so I think under Obama and under Trump, there was a big pullback from international leadership. President Biden has found out that European security is absolutely vital to American security. And NATO feels more united now than any time I can remember. We've got even countries like Finland and Sweden thinking about perhaps joining one.
In 300 yards at Wagoners Roundabout, take the second exit onto the Parkway A312.
Stronger and deployed closer to Russia than we've ever been. And President Biden is talking leadership language, and actually, I think has performed very well in terms of pulling the alliance together so far.
But meanwhile, the component parts of NATO are changing as well, and there's a lot of talk about the EU finding a defence component which would then become, quotes, the European leg of NATO. And I just wonder where you think that would leave us.
I mean, we've gone round and round those circles for years, but now we have a Germany that is really serious about spending money on defence. That could be a game changer. But is it going to be defence which is compatible with NATO and bolstering the overall NATO effort? Is it going to be more about European autonomy, which is rather the direction that President Macron tends to take things in? We are not at the table of that very important EU debate, working out how they're going to do defence in the years to come.
Yes, we're not at the table. There's been a lot of sort of chatter on social media about pictures of Boris Johnson ambling around at this summit, looking rather lost, being ignored or cold-shouldered by Macron and indeed Biden. When you look at that, do you think there is something going on there that we should be worried about?
Well, I think the body language there looked very, very uncomfortable for Boris Johnson, yes. But even worse was his absence from the European summit, where Joe Biden was welcomed by European leaders and Boris Johnson wasn't there. Partly, I think, because of the outrageous remarks he made at the party conference at the weekend, somehow comparing Brexit to the struggle that the Ukrainians are fighting. So, but we are, for all that awkward body language, we are serious players in NATO. We are not now in the EU, and there is going to be a really important debate in the years to come about how EU deploys its weight in the world, especially with Germany now taking a stronger role. How will it continue sanctions against Russia? Britain will not be there, and that is a real problem. I hope one of the outcomes of this awful crisis.
Exit the roundabout onto the Parkway.
Gets back to a serious grown-up.
Continue on the Parkway for 1 mile.
Peter Ricketts, Lord Ricketts, thanks so much for joining this evening. Very much appreciated. Thank you very much. And I'm joined here in studio by Ben Kentish. Ben, I'm sure you've been poring over that Boris Johnson press conference we were talking about a moment ago. Top take from it?
I think the most interesting line was a pretty clear rejection, Andrew, of President Zelensky's requests for NATO to provide not just jets, that's been on the table for a while, but now tanks. Boris Johnson confirming that he had asked for that, but he said, the UK Prime Minister, this is, at the moment, it's logistically very difficult to provide them, and the UK is instead going to focus on to continue on providing missiles.
And Peter Ricketts was saying much the same thing. It is a bit weird, though, isn't it? Is it okay to send over missiles which can destroy tanks, but you can't send tanks? It's like a kind of dancing on the head of angels dancing on the head of pins argument.
It's an interesting, so the distinction that people, I've asked people in government this before, the distinction they make, Andrew, is weapons that could be used within Ukraine's borders to defend Ukraine, and those that could be used potentially into Russia. So they won't provide jets because they could be used to use their sort of
I see, so that's the logic.
They could in theory be used to attack Russia on Russian turf, and they don't want NATO or Western UK planes doing that. But with tanks, of course, really, I don't think that does apply. I think the issue with tanks, unlike jets, is it's more about logistics. How do you get lots of tanks, well, Zelensky wants 200, into Mariupol, which is surrounded by Russian troops? You can't
without the Russians bombing on the way in. Exactly.
It's very difficult.
I get that. Let me ask you about this sort of strange story that's been growing all day about Boris Johnson being cold-shouldered and looking a bit uncomfortable, and he was wandering around amongst the other leaders. It's very, very easy to make too much of this. You know, he might have been thinking about something else. He might not have had anything to say. He might have been bored. He might, etc., etc., etc. But it did look odd. and this is going to be used by his...
In a quarter of a mile, at Cranford Parkway interchange, take the second exit onto the M4 slip road to Heathrow Airport, M25.
Perhaps even more significantly, of him not being invited to a key meeting of EU leaders tonight, where they will discuss many of the issues that they've been discussing at NATO today, in relation to Ukraine, weaning themselves off Russian energy and so on. It was sort of expected in recent days that, given the clear incentive to work closely together with the UK and the EU on these issues, that Boris Johnson would be invited to that meeting. He hasn't been, and that's why people are starting to say, take that and then look at the video. Is there an issue here? There is other footage of him, mingling warmly with European leaders that Number 10 will point to. But it is that snub, and it does, of course, come after you were talking to Simon Coveney just a day or two ago. EU leaders were pretty unhappy with the comparison that he seemed to make between Brexit and what's going on in Ukraine, and that's part of the context too.
Well, he kind of did make it, I think, Ben. Ben Kentish, thanks very much indeed. Ben Kentish, our Westminster correspondent. Now, still to come, I'm going to be speaking to the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab. But you're listening to Andrew Marr, and Lottie Morley has the news.
A former representative to NATO has told LBC...
Exit the roundabout onto the slip road.
...tanks and aircraft to help...
In a quarter of a mile, merge onto M4.
It's told tonight on Andrew Marr there's a risk that Russia would bomb a convoy taking the goods into Ukraine. The head of P&O Ferries has told MPs their new staff will be paid an average of £5.50 an hour. Peter Hebblethwaite also admitted unions weren't consulted before they sacked 800 staff because they knew the plan wouldn't be accepted. And Wales will be just one victory away from their first World Cup final since 1958 if they win their match this evening. They face Austria in their qualifying playoff semi-final. LBC weather, cloudy with a chance of light rain in the north, clear elsewhere, a low of 2 degrees.
This is LBC.
This is the new way to sell your car from home. This is the Motorway. Motorway's trusted dealers compete to give you the best price, meaning you could get more than you expected for your old car. And once you've found the perfect price, you can sit back and relax. We'll pick your car up from home for free. It really is that simple. Get your quote and get started at motorway.co.uk. This is the way. This is the Motorway.
Mini eggs, bunch of flour, thing of milk, 5 butter, lots of sugar, some baking powder, a bit of zest, then cherries, jam, cream, splash here, dash there, whip it, oven it, ta-da! Not a cake. Amounts matter, like how much, how long, and when. Getting business right means getting just the right amount of everything, including insurance. Superscript, monthly business insurance shaped around you.
Global Academy, a unique media school like no other.
When I do apply for a job, I already have most of the skills needed.
Kickstart your career in media. Visit globalacademy.com.
Save energy now. Save money now. Control your central heating from your smartphone.
Helps you save energy.
In fact, we guarantee to save you energy or your money back. See website for details. And Tado smart thermostats work with almost all heating systems. Your home, your comfort zone. Save energy or your money back with Tado smart thermostats. Conditions apply. Visit tado.com. TADO.
German engineered.
We've got loads of great offers at Morrison's this Mother's Day, like our British beef topside. Better than half price at just $4.99 per kilo. And a box of milk tray, now only $1.99. Morrison's. Make good things happen. Majority of stores subject to availability. Beef was £12.50 per kilo. Offers end 27th of March.
Leading Britain's conversation, LBC, tonight with Andrew Marr.
The time's 6:34. I've had a happy day ambling around, talking to all the clever people, and I was joined a little earlier by Yael Selfridge. She's the chief economist at KPMG, to talk about the spring statement. I asked her if she thought an energy crunch could send us back to the political and social turbulence of the 1970s.
So I think we are going to face issues. It's going to be harder times. But one difference I see this time round is that at least when it comes to the labour market, it is a very tight labour market. And if anything, we have record number of vacancies and people are switching jobs very easily and they find it relatively easy to find a job. So when it comes to consumer confidence and when it comes to consumers or to households' ability to earn a living, that's probably a slightly better picture now.
more resilience perhaps today. Now, at KPMG, you're talking to businesses of all sides, large and small.
In a quarter of a mile, keep right to stay on M4.
Face a recession.
Well, businesses generally have been very worried about a number of things for some time. Inflation is one of them, labor costs and availability of labor has been another one, and now increasingly...
Keep right to stay on M4.
Industries like car manufacturing, the easing of supply chains that we were hoping will not be...
Continue on M4 for 2 miles.
And we may face some more headwinds in that area, not just because of the conflict, but also because we've had further shutdowns in China with the pandemic there escalating a little bit more this month.
There's been a very strange phrase tossed around, fiscal headroom, which, as I understand it, means the amount of money the Chancellor didn't necessarily think was going to be available to him, but is, and how much of that he did not choose to spend. Can you tell us, roughly speaking, how much money the Chancellor could have spent and didn't?
Well, based on the revision to borrowings that the OBR has made, he could potentially have up to 50 billion of, if you like, a reduction, an additional reduction to the borrowings that wasn't penciled in earlier on. He hasn't spent all of that. He probably spent a bit less than half, if that. But the thing to bear in mind is that these are just a little bit of fluid numbers in the sense that all will then depend as well on what the forecasts are going to be going forward in terms of what kind of headroom is going to have in the future. We, for example, think that the OBR potentially had forecasts for next year and the year after that are very optimistic. We think that forecast the GDP for the UK economy is probably going to be much weaker in 2023 and 2024, and therefore actually when you think of the headroom going forward, it may not as much. And then we need to bear in mind that given all the uncertainties that we have at the moment with the conflict in Ukraine, between Russia and Ukraine, we could see in terms of risk much further deterioration in terms of the implication for the UK economy.
Yeah.
In a quarter of a mile, keep right to stay on M4.
Now, you may have noticed there's a bit of a history theme to the show tonight, and there's some pretty sensational history just coming. A new documentary on Channel 4 going out this weekend claims that Edward VIII, the Queen's uncle, was a straightforward traitor who urged Germany to bomb Britain. The historian behind it...
Keep right to stay on M4.
...joins me now. Welcome, Dr. Lowney. We know, of course, it's a fairly familiar idea that Edward VIII was king for less than a year.
Continue on M4 for 6 miles.
Of a wronger. But these revelations go much further. They're very specific. Tell us about the allegation that he was encouraging Nazi Germany to bomb Britain, first of all.
Well, we've been aware for a long time about these captured German documents. These were documents between the ambassadors of Spain and Portugal in 1940 to Ribbentrop in Berlin. And those documents talked about something called Operation Willy, which is a plan to entice the Duke of Windsor to, in a sense, come back as a Marshal Petain figure, a Gauleiter. It's all
to be the puppet king of the Nazis.
A puppet king, exactly. And there's, of course, been a lot of fiction around that. I think a lot of historians of the past have suggested that he was an innocent Duke. He was unaware of the plans and didn't engage with them. But it's become very clear from the research I did, and this is research all over the world in a lot of private archives, as well as the Royal Archives and in a whole series of places, that he actually actively engaged with the Germans. We have, for example, from the Portuguese Secret Service reports that he was in and out of the German embassy. We have, in fact, correspondence. The King George VI was monitoring this, and we have the correspondence there.
And he actually suggested to the Germans that they should carry on bombing Britain.
Yes, he said the best way to subjugate the British was to bomb them.
That's astonishing.
We put that document in the documentary. I mean, we've been very keen, as I was in my book, that everything should be sourced from primary sources,
I mean, the evidence has been there. There's been some new evidence, for example, from Tommy Lassel's diary. Tommy Lassel's was the King's private secretary, and also from the diaries of a man called Guy Liddell, who was a senior MI5 officer. But I think the thing is that most royal historians tend to be rather deferential, and they put two and two and made three, when someone, perhaps for another generation as an outsider, could see that they actually made four.
Well, I find this pretty jaw-dropping. The other quite clearly traitorous allegation is that he visited the French front lines before the war, just before the war, and spotted where there were weaknesses, and then told Berlin so that when the Germans attacked France, they could go for the weak spots. And that came directly from Britain's previous king, the man that the Germans wanted on the throne if they defeated Britain.
Yes, he served as liaison to the First French Army in the autumn of 1939. He sent back a report to the British on the weakness of the French defences, particularly the fact that people can come around the side of the Maginot Line. The British didn't seem to take too much interest, but he passed this information to a man called Charles Beddoe, who was a known German agent, who's a man who lent him his castle when he got married in 1937. And we know again from the documentation that Beddoe, who was travelling to Berlin at this time and was seeing the Duke regularly, passed this information to the German ambassador in The Hague, who passed it back to Berlin, and the German war plans changed. So whether it was witting or unwitting, he certainly was the person who passed this information back.
Helped defeat France in 1940. I wonder if this answers a big mystery for some royal watchers, which was why the late Queen Mother was so hostile to the Duke of Windsor and really kept him away from the rest of the royal family and indeed away from Britain for as long as she could. She really, really disliked him intensely. Perhaps she knew all of this, and this explains why.
Yes, George VI was, I mean, as I say, the correspondence is all in the Royal Archives. He was monitoring it very clearly. I don't know how he got all of this stuff, but there's clearly a lot of surveillance going on. Of course, Edward VIII had been under surveillance even before he became king by MI5. But it wasn't just the Queen Mum, it was the whole royal family, and even Churchill. Churchill refused to go on a cruise with him on Nassau's yacht after the war because of his feelings towards the Duke. And what we've seen also is a huge cover-up that took place when American historians wanted to publish these German documents. And Eisenhower and Churchill and various other people tried very hard to destroy them, suppress them, delay them, and then to spin them, accusing the German ambassadors of making it all up.
It is an astonishing story. We'll all be watching agog. Dr. Lowney, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. You're listening to Andrew Marr on LBC. The Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, joins me next, and the time is 6:43.
Coming up at 7 on LBC, Ian Dale.
Last night, it was Ring Rishi. Tonight, it's Ring Rachel. The Shadow Chancellor will be here with me at 7 to take your calls.
Ian Dale.
In 300 yards, at the roundabout, take the third exit onto Tons Lane, A355. Exit the roundabout onto Tons Lane. Continue on A355 for 1 mile. In 200 yards, turn left onto Buckingham Avenue. Turn left onto Buckingham Avenue. Continue on Buckingham Avenue for 3/4 of a mile. In 300 yards, your destination will be on the left.